Welcome to Boyertown, Pennsylvania, a very special kind of place. We're here to introduce you to our unique community, to tell our story through some of those very people who have made it so. Here with us are some very special people in their own right. Let me introduce them. We have Margaret Harner, Lynette Holbert, and Christi Weidner. I'm Jeff D. Stahl. We love this town. As a lifetime resident of Boyertown, as are my mom, my dad, my grandparents, and great-grandparents, I consider Boyertown my town. I love it, and through my involvement and work as a teacher in the Boyertown School District, I want to continue Boyertown's legacy as a special kind of place. Margaret?
Like you, Jeff, I've lived in Boyertown almost all of my life, as had my parents, my grandparents, and on back. This was a very special place to grow up, and I have very fond memories. I've spent my career as teacher of history in the Boyertown School District and have had fantastic students all of those years. For the record, I want it noted that two of my very special students were Jeff Stahl and Zach Reinert. My husband Carl's family owned Unicast and the fashion hosiery mill in town, and two of our children, Eric and Jackie, have returned to the area to carry on the family tradition. Lynn was my next door neighbor and great friend as we were growing up on North Reading Avenue. We were always busy, driving our parents nuts, doing so many crazy, wonderful things. At the time, at least, we thought they were wonderful. What a fun time that was to grow up. Lynn, your turn.
Thanks, Margaret. You're talking about our growing up on North Reading Avenue gave me an instant flashback to our little club that we had. It was called the Marty Gwens, which was a combination of our names, including my sister Gwen. I must say that our play was indeed very creative. I remember the polka dot bridge that went between our backyards, the haunted house in your basement, the mock wedding, of course, and our lending library. Well, as you know, Daddy owned and operated the Linwood W. Ott Funeral Home for 42 years. So my roots are very firmly planted in Boyertown as well. This is a very special community, and I know that because I lived for 24 years in the West, and I've now come back to this very place, which I love. I have wonderful memories of growing up here, and I love knowing especially that the younger generation is here with us today and continuing to keep it just as special as we've always known it. Christi, tell the folks about yourself.
I can't tell you how firmly my roots are planted yet, but I can tell you how firmly I believe in and love this town. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to come home to a charming and small, quaint town where I was raised. I was raised in Boyertown and graduated here in 2006, and my dad and grandparents are lifetime area residents, as I may be one day.
And we can't wait to take you down memory lane and uptown through the memories and reflections of many very special individuals. The mission of coming together is a sharing of some of the events and people who created this special kind of place, along with the thoughts and ideas of those who intend to keep it so.
During the war, of course, milk and milk products was rationed. Mm-hmm. So when a customer purchased ice cream, they had to take half their order in either ices or sherbets, and then half of it they could get in ice cream, because in the ices there was no milk or cream.
There was no organized sports. We had pickup games. A lot that was convenient we played in. We played baseball, again, as I say. We used to play marbles. We were all over the place. The idea that the automobile takes us, if we want to go on a task or run an errand, we jump in our automobile. In Boyertown, I used to walk to the store, do errands for my mother. I walked here, I walked back and forth. You got the interaction with the people. We walked to school. We were not bused to school. And again, those nice walks together and what have you was it was conducive to fellowship.
But you always had recess, and during recess you played fox and geese. Well, usually the bigger man was
Right.
the upperclassmen were the fox, and he wanted to make sure he could catch a geese.
What did he do
We
with
had
the
a
geese
bank.
when he caught them?
He usually tackled you. I lived a life of Tom Sawyer, and I can tell you I could roam all over the land. They had 109 acres at that time, a pond right on the close to the house, where I would ice skate, I would fish, and hunt and fish and all kinds of things like that. And what a thrill that was! It kept me out in the open most of the time.
We had to make our own entertainment, and nothing that was battery operated or anything. We used our imagination for everything. And you played with the kids in the neighborhood, dolls and other games, that tag. I know we used to play tag a lot, and hide and seek.
One of the games was hitting the cans around the street, and we did that. We did baseball. We played baseball. I was playing ball, hardball, and I don't know, I guess my eyesight might have been bad. But boy, I got whacked right here. I got right there, spit the tooth out, and I forgot baseball then.
On Friday night, Frenzy night, okay, you look forward. You have to live for something. When you work as hard as the resourceful people did Boyertown at that time, you have to look forward to something. So you look forward to Friday night. And of course, the first thing you have your paycheck in hand. So you've got to go to the bank. And I've always mused over the fact that during that time that people had a check in hand and went to the bank, we had 2 banks. 2. And today, everything is done electronically, and we have literally a bank on every other corner. So it's pretty different. The movie theater, there weren't just a few people in it. It was packed, and if you didn't get there early, you wouldn't get a seat. And so it was that, and of course the firehouses all had live music and dances, and that was part of the entertainment. You'd walk the street, look in the store windows. There was always a lot to see. You got to know the people personally.
I started soda jerking, and I loved it. And I worked behind the fountain, and at that time we made everything, all of our syrups from scratch. Oh. And we had a enameled 10-quart bucket with a long wooden spoon that we cooked it on the back in the kitchen. of the house. We lived there. My brother, either myself or my brother, had the duty of stirring it. And you had to stir it, keep stirring so it didn't stick. But he also allowed us to read comic books to pass the time. But if you didn't keep your mind on the job what you're doing, you found out the syrup boiled over. And what a mess. And then, of course, you guessed it, you can understand the consequences what we got. And, of course, then in those days we did a lot of delivery. The ladies, you know, they would have their afternoon or weekly card parties, and many times in those early days they didn't have refrigeration, or if they did, they had ice boxes.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we got a lot of calls when Mrs. So-and-so, I can think of Mrs. David Heiser, I can see her today. She'd call, she'd like a quart of ice cream, so we'd dip it, and one of us kids would run it down to her, you know,
how
and
interesting.
so she could serve it before it melted.
Gee.
Well, we did a lot of veterinarian medicine in those days, too, you know. My son, we were just talking here the other day, one of the chemicals we stocked was carbon disulfide, which is really highly explosive. I mean, it's very sensitive in the right circumstances. But anyway, we used to sell that by the gallons to the farmers, and what they did with it, they would treat their wheat. When they had in the harvest, the wheat, the seed, and the barn floor, they'd put a pipe down through it and pour the carbon disulfide, the liquid, down through, and it vaporizes and works up through the grain and kills the bugs. And or liquid smoke. We sold that by the gallons. Pyroligneous acid. They use that in their butchering. They paint it on the meats and put them out to cure. And yeah, they can't use that commercially today anymore.
Yeah.
But times change. In those days, this is what we did. Physicians would write their own formulas, their own recipes, and pharmacists had to compound the medication. It wasn't prepackaged. It wasn't. We didn't have the big manufacturers making these things for you. So you compounded the things. You measured it out. You put Vaseline or petroleum on the slab, and you made your own ointments and incorporated the powders. And the nickname for pharmacists, you don't hear it much today anymore, but they were nicknamed the pill rollers.
I never heard that.
And this piece of equipment here illustrates vividly how that come about. This is what is known as a pill roller. You would make the formulation, it was a consistency of like a clay. You roll it out, and you use the paddle to roll it out on here into a very small pencil-like tube, just the width of this platform. So it was on there. Then you would put this cutting device on the top and take the roll here and pull it forward, and at that time it would slice that whole roll into individual pellets, and as it did so, it also rolled it and deposited it down here in the recess. So you ended up with like a miniature pea. And this is the pill roller, and that's how you made these things. And then you had to dust them with talc so they didn't stick to each other, you know, and make them dry. They prescribed an awful lot of suppositories for various diseases, conditions. And this is just one example. This happens to be a brass mold. I also have aluminum ones and also have plastic ones. But they all operate the same way. You would secure this, you would make your mixture over with a little Bunsen burner, heat it up, an alcohol lamp, and pour the mixture into these slots, in these holes. Take this mold and put it in the refrigerator to chill it and harden it. When it was chilled, you'd open it up, spread it open, and break out the pills.
Life back then was different. It was charming and unique in a variety of ways. You're going to be surprised at some of these memories.
Grew up on a farm, which of course I didn't always appreciate growing up, and maybe it was a little more primitive, but it was, I feel, kind of character building.
I saw my first television set. There was a small one in the window, and we were standing there watching Milton Berle. And like any new technology, it was very expensive at that time. A small set cost around $500, but the average wage was $1 an hour.
But I found when I was young, there were still a lot of people who couldn't speak English. They spoke only Pennsylvania Dutch.
And then there was our neighbor, who was a fellow named Mr. Ettinger, and he was an adjacent farmer, and he would bring the milk out on his own and sell it for 5 cents a quart. And they would dip it right out of the can into their container that was brought out. But my sister and I, we walked from New Brellville to Boyertown here. I'd say about 20 to 30 minutes. I went right to high school.
I remember when the tabloids first started to come on, and of course they had pictures of women on, and if they had kind of a low-cut dress, you know, people thought it was awful, you know.
I was born in 1942 during the war years, and the nighttime was dark. It seems as though whenever my parents took me outside at night, I focused upon the stars, and it stayed with me.
In 6th grade, we moved into the new building, and we had water fountains. In the old building, we had to go down the hill and pump water.
Imagine Boyertown as a cutting-edge destination, the biggest, the most creative, the cleanest place around.
Now wait a minute here. Biggest? Cutting edge? A lot of people around here call it Boring Town. But it is clean. Tell me more.
Well, my dad came to Boyertown in the mid-30s during the Great Depression. He had lost his job. He had a job offer here in Boyertown, had Nyman's drugstore. And a year or so later, he opened his own business at 100 East Philadelphia Avenue. And after the Mrs. Nyman passed away, Dad bought her estate, and he incorporated all his inventory and relocated to 42 East Philadelphia Avenue. Then doing great until 1943, when we had the fire, when he experienced the fire. It was a Friday afternoon in September. Unfortunately, the main concern was one of the employees. His name was Brooke Davis. He was working in the basement when the explosion occurred. The force of the explosion blew the steel cellar doors open and everything out across the street. And of course, Brooke lost his life. And he even had to get, the fire was so bad, chemically speaking, that they even brought equipment from Pottstown to combat the fire. So anyway, then Dad just, it was during the war, and he had to go before I think it was the War Production Board, to get permission to rebuild. He pleaded his case. It was granted. He got the materials. In 1 year's time, the store was rebuilt. Now, when I was in senior high, we had a very busy lunch trade. All the local clerks, store clerks, and office of the banks, and the office staff from the casket factory or whatever it may be. And they all flocked in at one time to be waited on, and they had to eat and get out.
That's right.
And I'd run home, dash upstairs, eat a fast lunch. I was back down in the store by 12 o'clock when the casket factory whistle blew.
My.
And I'd work the soda fountain sandwiches, ham salad sandwich, whatever it is.
So you made them.
And I stayed there, worked until the last horn blew. I'd run down to school,
Oh my
and I'd
goodness.
just beat the bell. That this store was, at that time, was the largest independent drugstore east of the
Is
Mississippi.
that right?
Anniversaries, Dad would have entertainment here from the radio stations in Philadelphia, like Farmer Jones and his wife Mary Jones, and at that time they lived over around Perkiomen Heights.
Oh,
They had a farm over there, but he was a popular entertainment in this one of the local stations in Philadelphia in the mornings, you know.
mm-hmm.
So anyway, he would have them, or Sally, what's her name? Sally Starr.
Oh, yes.
And those different ones that he'd have here as
Come to
a
Boyertown.
draw, as entertainment. You know, and back in those days too, there was a gentleman, an elderly man. He made a little, he was retirement age, but he made a little business of his own as a street sweeper. He did the center of town here, like South Rain Avenue and down East Philly there, to the business district, with his little push cart, shovel and broom, and he swept the gutters.
Oh, my goodness.
And then the property owners, the business owners would support him. You know, I don't know if there was any formal fee. I don't know that, but they did support him, and he made a little livelihood of that.
That's
and
interesting.
kept the town clean. And that was, and hey, you had people coming in the store, strangers, remarking how clean this town is.
Wonderful.
I mean, it makes an impression, you know, and the first impression is the best impression.
Mm-hmm. Imagine our fair town being a place of privilege.
People who worked in this community were very proud people, and one of the things that amazed me, looking back then, was the work ethic of the people. People worked 5.5 days, didn't think of a thing about it. Most people, and while there was a depression, there was not a depression in Boyertown. Now that sounds like a dichotomy, but let me say this. The women worked part-time, 2.5 days in the knitting mills. The men worked 2-3 days or what have you in the various factories.
Then, just like today, Boyertown enjoyed a solid reputation as hardworking, enterprising, and friendly, looking out for the needs of the people who lived and worked here from its very beginnings in creative ways.
Dan Boyer's family created this community. Some of the very special things that we all love came from Dan Boyer's ancestors.
My family actually came to Boyertown in about 1800. Two brothers, Daniel and Henry. They were really farmers whose family had recently, in 1731, come into the country from the Palatinate area of Germany, which is what we would today call Greater Bavaria. They were strictly illiterate farmers. But as young men, they saw an opportunity and they migrated away from Philadelphia, where the family had landed a couple generations before, and decided there was an opportunity in a place that was what to become Boyertown. One brother started a tavern, the other started a store, realizing that the crossroads in what is now the center of Boyertown was a great place to go towards Kutztown, which had been settled many years before, Reading, Pottstown, and by way of Yellow House in that area. So what happened over the succeeding years was this little out-of-the-way stopover became a facility to service the travelers, to get them something to eat and drink if there was inclement weather. And remember, the roads were terrible at that time. They could stay overnight, get food, provision the horses. This led to a kind of a commercial area. I understand that the place was called Boyers at first because you'd go to the Boyers, talk about the family. Later on, about 1835, I believe, the town was actually incorporated and laid out in lots. The area was very successful. A lot of very well-to-do farmers, mining, and general industry. So it became a kind of a commercial hub. Even though Boyertown was small, it lured a lot of people to the area for the goods and services.
But not everybody was born here, and those who've come from other places have a clear picture of the community's character.
No, I'm not a townie, but my mother's family is from Engelsville, which was formerly Spunktown. So I spent a lot of my summers in Boyertown, and they were wonderful. My grandparents had a farm in Engelsville, and what I remember most is really my grandma Fryer would take us into town, and we always had a dentist appointment with Dr. Bornman. Grandma always made sure we had our dentist, and we went to Berkey's. This building, first of all, was in the Boyer family. This was Horace Boyer's house. And the Boyers finally, in 1987, sold this building to a friend of mine, Gary Slade. And Gary wanted to make this a bed and breakfast. And therefore, this building had to be gutted. Now, we went from a 3-bedroom house to now 10 bedrooms and 11 bathrooms. So I helped with the gutting of that, and the business opened up October of 1988. So now this year is the 20th anniversary for Twin Turrets. I, as owner, is 14 years, but it's just been phenomenal. You know, the mayor leads parades, and that's neat. It's neat that I can be in a parade and come down our street and I can see what's happening with our buildings. But you know what's beautiful? When I can see and hear a mother saying to her child, "That's the mayor." And I'm saying it because they're already teaching their children what is a mayor. That's important.
It was neat to come into town to shop. It seems funny to think of coming into town to Boyertown to shop at that point, but what we did, there was the Acme and all kinds of other, there was Ames and stores in which you could shop right in town. When my father moved with us some years later, for a few years before he passed away, he loved Johnson's store. It was a small store. It wasn't spacious. And I guess the shelves, as I remember them, the shelves were pretty close together. But it had everything. And my dad just liked to wander through it. But I think especially the people were so friendly to him as an outsider. He just felt so much at home there.
This town had it all. Variety, top-flight entertainment, simple, honest folks who enjoyed serving others.
I bet you'll love learning about the entertainment aspects, about what the folks used to do around town.
For, I think, 15 cents or 20 cents, we could get into the theater on a Saturday afternoon. So there were a whole half a dozen of us. We'd get down on the railroad tracks and race each other to Boyertown. And we'd get to the theater, and I'll never forget one of the first movies I saw in what was then the Lyric Theater was Tom Mix and Tony Runs Wild.
I finished 3rd grade in Pottstown, and in 4th grade I was up at what was called Lincoln School at that time. The railroad tracks divided the town. Those on the other side went to Washington School. North of that went to Lincoln School. I was about 12, I guess, when I had a paper route. And we had to collect weekly and that was during the Depression. And I had, I think it was 121 customers, and I did real well if at the end of the week, for the entire week's work, if I had $1. The rest of it, a lot of the people say, well, you have to come the day that they get their Social Security check because they didn't have the money. And the thing that broke all the paper carriers' backs, including myself, was all the other kids be playing out on Saturday, and you'd be out there trying to get enough money to pay your bill. But then I hit the big time. I became an usher at the Boyertown State Theater. I got 50 cents a night. Most people heard of Boyertown. Was either the casket company or the Body Works. But it was a rare person that never heard of the community. I remember that we used to have many tours through the factory, mostly from mortuary schools in Philadelphia. And I remember there was one lad that, you know, the Pennsylvania Dutch have always had the work ethic. And this one youngster, I never forgot that, he said, I have to tell my grandfather about this place. He said, I've never seen people work like this. And that was their work ethic.
Every block or two had an ice cream store, something to do, to walk to. And living in Boyertown, everything we did was a walk-to event. I went through grade school, junior high school, and senior high school, and never ate in a cafeteria. I went home for lunch every day. It's still a nice town to live in, and one can still enjoy and raise a family very nicely in Boyertown, which I have done. I decided to come back to Boyertown to raise my children because I wanted them to have the same opportunities of growing up in a small town that I did. Our high school class, we were about 100 people in our class. At that time, we merged from Lincoln and Washington School to junior high school, and in the 9th grade, the one-room schoolhouse kids came in and joined us.
All of your needs were satisfied on Main Street. People, they went to the bank, and then they probably went to eat somewhere. We had great restaurants, super restaurants. We had the Boyertown Inn, Schaefer's Restaurant. We had the Mansion House.
Think of Boyertown as cutting edge in its marketing and educational opportunities. We had very creative people who were dedicated to each other and to successful enterprises in town.
I'd love to learn about some of the marketing and educational tools so that I can take them back and share them with my students so they can then again give back to the community and make it a better place.
Dad did advertising in those days. Again, we used the circulars. Today, businesses have them stuffed in the daily newspaper. But in those days, we passed them by hand, door to door.
Did you do that too?
Yeah, my brother and I would canvass the town. Goodness. He'd take one side of the street, I'd take the other side of the street, and pass them door to door. Dad always said, be sure you secure them. Don't let them that they can blow away in the breeze. And never put them in a mailbox because it's illegal to do that. Mm-hmm. Radio advertising, Dad had a favorite there that with WPAZ, he sponsored a noontime radio program. Yeah. And I think it was a 15-minute duration. It wasn't long, no, at least no longer than a half hour, but I think 15.
I think you're
right.
The
premise of the thing was that your phone rang, you were supposed to answer it. Don't say hello, say bouse. If you answered your phone in that manner, you won a prize, a gift. If you didn't, if you just said hello, unfortunately you didn't qualify for a gift. My dad was a great believer in taking care of the customer, repaying or pay back with gifts. And I have showing here a lot of giveaways that. You know, it was always an enticement to come in and get a free gift.
When my dad went into the furniture business in 1948, His basis for survival was the merchandise club. You went into the store once a week, you paid the man $1, you got your card punched. At the end of 25 weeks, you had a card worth $25. It was an upfront savings system. As an added incentive, once a week they'd pull a number. If your number was pulled, the rest of your card was free, which meant you could win anywhere from $24 to $1. And people would do it, and they would save up money. And when they came in to buy a living room suit, they'd have 10 of those cards. They'd have $250, and they could walk out with a living room suit.
Over the years, I was very involved for a number of years with the Boyertown Sidewalk Sale and Sidewalk Expo. And remembering the early years when I was a youngster, when the sidewalk sale involved literally dozens of downtown stores. Of course, that has changed, hence the name change from sale to expo. Now there's just a handful of stores that may participate, and now it's mostly vendors and exhibitors that come into town. Downtown, for instance, has changed dramatically. I mean, I can remember being a youngster when we had a number of clothing stores, and we had a shoe store, and we had carve and fry toy and gift shop, and the Boyertown Inn was still operating as a restaurant and a coffee shop and an ice cream shop.
I guess the concept of the marching unit as such, when it was organized, and of course it followed through all these years. The alumni band, I guess, was the outcome of students graduating from the Boyertown area high school and wanting to keep playing and keep an organization together, and that's how they started the alumni band.
The folks we interviewed have drawn on their own personal experiences, and you will see what drew them together, sustained our community in tough times, and led to present-day successes.
Just the inventiveness, the dedication, the attention to detail that Dan Baus talks about when presenting his hobby says a lot about the Boyertown community. The simplicity, the stick-to-itiveness, which is what has made us successful all these years.
In the early days in the 40s, I had one uncle worked for the ice cream company. He was one of the outside salesmen. And in those days, what they did was they go around to their dealers and make displays, dummy displays for them to put on the counter or in the show window or someplace. And I remember my Uncle Mark would always go back to the back kitchen sink, and somehow or other he used soap powder like the old ivory flakes, you know. And he'd fashion these things, make sundaes and sodas. And boy, he would just whip it up in the glasses and whip up this soap that looked like bubbly carbonation and all that. And I really never, I'm sorry I never learned from him, you know. I just never thought about it. But I knew a little bit, so I tried it, and well, that soap didn't work too well. I couldn't get it right. But I used to shave ivory cakes of ivory soap, because you can't buy ivory flakes anymore. So I'd shave soap.
Yeah.
And anyway, I ended up with this modeling clay type of thing and fashioned it. Chopped peanuts on the peanut sundae there. That happens to be cork, bottle corks. I'd sit and pick with my fingernails little bits of cork until I had enough bits made.
Oh, they look so
Then I rolled
real.
it in some paint and to darken them, you know, make it look like the color of peanuts. And that's what I have there.
Even those from other communities recognize those special qualities that we admire today.
And those that came here were drawn to settle and continue adding to the community's strength.
We came here in 1934, in October to be precise, and the reason we came here was that my father was the first brewmaster of the Boyertown Brewery.
I was born in Boyertown, but then that was during the Depression, so they moved to Pottstown. And then my sister was, I believe, 8 years older than I. So I finished kindergarten. No, I finished 3rd grade in Pottstown. Then we moved over to Boyertown. But being that my sister was quite a bit older, when she moved to Pottstown, the Boyertown educational system was so far ahead of Pottstown that she skipped several grades. So she graduated from high school when she was 16.
My mother and father and 5 children lived in Kutztown, and from there we came to Boyertown in March of 1945 because our father, Alfred Haddad, started a shoe factory after the Second World War, along with cousin George Haddad. That was in the 2nd floor and 3rd floor, the building we now know as the Bashful Barn Building. And from Kutztown, we came here to a half a double home in the 700 block of Philadelphia Avenue. And I was in 4th grade at that time. And being a 4th grader in March, going to a new school, leaving all my friends in Kutztown was most difficult, but made much easier by the many friendly kids I had in my class at that time. And whatever there was, we seemed to do. And high school was the center of our lives. We would go there in the morning, come back after activities in the afternoon, and go back for activities at nighttime, and that was high school.
I went to the Landis School, which was on Landis Lane. It was in Cobrookdale Township, and it was north of New Berlinville. And it was a one-room school from 1st grade to 8th grade. When I entered the service, I was called to Philadelphia, and my father was so upset with me that I was going in the service. He said, these boys that go down to Randolph Field, West Point of the Air, he said, they're coming up here. And he said, killed, they're dead, and I'm burying them. And he said, I don't know why you're doing this. I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. I don't want to go in the infantry. I want to be a pilot. I want to be the best pilot in the Air Force. And when we marched down that night, that evening, that afternoon, and I guess there were about 30 or 40 of us, and my father came from work and walked down with us all the way to 30th Street Station. He stayed on that train. The conductors came and said, you gotta get off this train or you're gonna go down wherever we're going. And they wouldn't tell us where we were going. This tank came driving up, and I taxied up and shut the engines down. And the guy I saw it was a 1st lieutenant, and I had no idea who it was until I got back here to Boyertown. Here the Boyertown Times, here the tank driver with Freddie Shadell, my classmate from Boyertown. I had no idea it was him, and here I was the pilot, and from there then we went up to Seoul, Korea.
He would always stop for his Sunday paper on his way. And if he'd come after the store was closed, we had the paper box. At that time, we had the papers, I think, on the step, and we had a little round coin holder for them to put the money in, and that went down into the cellar in a box. And if he didn't have the money for his paper, or the change for his paper, he'd put a note in that he got his paper, and he'd pay it the next time he come in, which he did. He always did. But it's those little things that you remember.
Well, I did have the privilege, and I have to say it as a privilege, of growing up with a father who was a businessman in the community. For example, in the 40s, you couldn't find very many kids who had ever been to Philadelphia. Many summers I'd be in Philadelphia 4 or 5 times because my dad was there on business and I'd travel with him. He had a pinball and music machine business for a while. And I would get to travel with him when he was doing the route and doing maintenance on the machines. Consequently, I got to know many, many business people in town whom I knew by face.
Boyertown schools and teachers have created special memories among many of their students.
And those of us who make teaching a business, in my case, family business, are determined to make sure that the Boyertown school system is strong and successful in the future.
I came to Boyertown as a 10th grader. In high school, well, let's see, I got to be on the debating team. You know, the one teacher who did the unusual for me was Miss Reller, was her name. She was a typing teacher. And, you know, the schedule was such that those who took the college prep course could not schedule typing. And about 3 or 4, including Ruth Yoder, who was later the secretary to the superintendent, Ruth and Esther Hoffman and Charlotte Shane and I, we wanted to have typing because we felt if we'd get to college, it would help us to do some typing. And we explained this to Miss Reller, and she said, well, she said, I don't have a period that you can come in, but I have enough time at the lunch period. So she was a wonderful person. She took us in and taught us how to type at noontime during her lunch period. I'll never forget when the 1965 World's Fair was in New York. I was the one who used to take the kids on field trips and so forth. So Harry came to me and he said, you know, Chet, a lot of these youngsters will never get to New York in their whole life. He says, I would like to make it possible for everyone in our high school to see the World's Fair. And you know, in 2 years' time, we took 54 busloads of kids to New York City and brought them all home. When we take the kids, every year I'd take the kids to New York to the United Nations, and we'd go up to see the Cathedral of St. John. And after they had built the World Trade Center, I always took the girls and the boys to the top of the World Trade Center.
It so happened that Boyertown, they were looking for somebody to take over the marching unit project here and run the band. I had a lot of response of students who wanted to be a part of the organization. I used a large band front in the high school at that time, and had a lot of kids in that marching unit, and they hadn't had anything like this before. They had a small, I guess it was a 35-piece band.
I always say how I'd love to go back and visit the Victorian Boyertown, but really I don't think I would change a thing about Boyertown today. I've been blessed to grow up in a town full of legacies from Boyertown's past and hard workers for the future.
You're right, Christy. It's the people of Boyertown that make us truly stand out.
Yes, Jeff, and we are lucky enough to have them all come together. They may not always know they're special, and they may not seem so on the outside when you pass them on Main Street, but only remarkable people say things like,
if I have no bigger legacy, it will be that I was one who shared and I was one who cared. I guess what I'm most proud of is the fact that I was able to come back to my hometown, a town that helped me develop into a caring and successful person. I was able to come back to this town, raise my family, and give them that opportunity, and still give other people in town who are growing up that same opportunity. I think what I remember most and am thankful most is that people gave me the chance and opportunity and I want to give that same opportunity back to more people.
When I became mayor, it gave me courage to voice my concerns, you know. And out of that came building a better Boyertown. I had seen an article in a newspaper about the town of Ambler, and I thought, that's it. They're going through a revitalization program, and there's a state program that assists you with that. It's a 5-year program. And looked into it, and son of a gun, Mary Gambler was on council at the time. She saw that need as well. We called a town meeting, and the town agreed. And the rest is history. This has grown beyond what I ever dreamed, and I cannot take credit for where it is now. I mean, the volunteers that we have that have come forward, we have architects, we have lawyers, we have teachers, we have the homemaker, we have kids. I just hope that I would be remembered as being caring. She listened to me, she cared, and that I was fair. And I hope that would be my epitaph. She cared, she listened, and she was a fair person.
I think my students would remember me as being fair, easygoing. They knew my limitations. We had a little system where they knew when I was running out of patience, and they knew they'd better haul it in or things would break. And I think they knew I had an interest in them, and I liked what I was doing. Even as a high school teacher, you've got to teach the student. What you teach them is secondary to the fact that you teach them. Secondly, you have got to treat them as human beings, not as so many seats in a classroom or so many bodies in a seat. I have found that if you treat a kid like a young adult, they will behave like a young adult. If you treat them like idiots, they behave like idiots. Teach them the way you want them to react.
It all started with Dad, and I think his legacy, which I want to carry on with, is service to the public. I acquired the store here, and I had the opportunity of which store I would like to locate, Pottstown, Boyertown, or Allentown, and I said right away that Boyertown's my hometown, and I wanted to stay here. This is where I was comfortable.
I felt when I became 80 years old, I'd be shot by a jealous husband. all the women, all the women I know are widows. That doesn't.
Well, I think they'll remember that I tried to help them if they had problems, personal problems.
One of the more significant sets of articles I did was on teenagers, and that came as a result of a woman sending in a letter about her daughter committing suicide. And instead of just printing the letter, I interviewed her, and she said, I just want people to be aware that they should pay attention to their children, to their children's problems. And from that grew out a whole series of articles about teenagers and some of the factors involved with teenagers. And people said to me, how did you know about all that? I said, because I had teenagers at home. I interviewed a young man who was a psychologist for teenagers and was a psychologist at a teenage shelter in Reading. And one of his significant contributions, I think, was saying that teenagers have this sense of failure sometimes because they haven't had enough success. As adults, we have failure, but we also have successes, and the balance is not the same for teenagers. Many times teenagers don't have enough successes behind them that when the failures come, they become very stressful to them, and that could lead to suicide. so that he suggested having parents really focus on the success of their children rather than point out all the failures.
In our differences is a great deal of strength. And what one person can't do, someone else can do.
Now, when folks look back and remember you and your life, what would you like them to say about you?
Well, Samsel, yeah, he's tried. He did a good job. But he's funny. He likes the kid a lot, and I do. So, just to be a good round fellow. Don't give up. Keep the love for your fellow man. Go to church. When you're doing a job, don't give up. I love Boyertown.
I can totally agree with Ray's advice. Keep the love. That's a personal value of my own. Actually, I'm sure I share many values with all these people.
I'm sure we can all identify with the values and goals of Boyertown's special people. So why don't we hear some more about those values and goals?
All right. Please join us as these special people provide insight into their personal missions, the values that guide them, and the goals that fuel their passion.
It was difficult for me to feel that I was good enough to run for mayor. I'm not educated, so to speak, and I was afraid I didn't have what the town needed. And I had to come up with what can I give them before I was willing to run for mayor. And really did not run until the general election. There was no one in the primary. But a promise I made was that I would be accessible to the people. And because of the occupation I have, I felt I could fulfill that.
The people that we had in Boyertown taking care of my father are the same kind of people that I had in my business. And I have found that if you do take care of people, they will take care of you. And it's a philosophy which I've had and carried on.
I don't know that I have any secret of success, really. Perhaps just a love of people, which I got from my mother, a love of history and studying, which I got from my father. Those two characteristics of my parents, I think I'm so blessed to have gotten those characteristics from them.
I think that, as I said, life is all about building relationships. And the older I get, the more convinced I am. And the key to building relationships is the fun that you can have along the way by being involved in Boyertown activities, being involved in various civic organizations, reaching out to people, and you would be surprised what information and what they can give back to you.
Now, we all learn from each other. We may not realize it, but we are. And as we go through life, those qualities are passed on to others, again, without realizing it. It's the lessons that you have learned through your involvement with many different experiences or organizations like the Civil Air Patrol, JCs. You're accumulating all this knowledge or know-how without even realizing it.
In Boyertown area, we're blessed with good volunteers in the fire company, in the Salvation Army, in the Red Cross. It don't matter what they're in, they give their all to that.
The big thing, the challenge to me was to get these young people here in Batesville, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, so that when they get out of 8th grade, they didn't quit school, but they went on to high school.
When I was selected to take the peace team to Japan from Washington, D.C.
What was the peace team?
Department of State and Department of War. At that time there wasn't Department of Defense, or Department of War.
Okay.
When I went over to Tokyo, they said, you're not permitted to land. General MacArthur doesn't want you to land because he wants to be on the air base to meet the Department of State, Department of War people.
Right.
And he said he doesn't want you to be on the air base till he gets there. So then they said, make a big circle around the air base, maybe make a couple of them. So then I did, and I made the first one and started my second one, and I was on the downwind leg. And then they called me and said, well, come on in and land now, because by the time you land, MacArthur will be on the field. So I did. I went in and landed and taxied up to the ramp. He came up on there and shook my hand. And
really?
So it was a great honor for me.
My legacy would be, if people remember me as being honest, that to me means more than anything else. I had a man in the store one day, and he said to me, you know, I always vote for you. I don't always agree with you. He said, but at least you're honest. And that to me means the most. And I think I've taught my kids to be that way.
If you want to be in business, you have to be understanding a lot about different customers. And most of all, I think, is to treat them the way you want to be treated yourself.
I thank my parents for not cheating me in life by instilling prejudices in me.
The thing I really like doing is getting involved in organizing events and helping to coordinate events and seeing all the elements come together, the fruition of all that, and seeing folks come together and have a good time. I like to laugh. I like to enjoy simple fun. I like to go to the Liberty Fire Company Carnival, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, and eat gravy burgers and French fries and sit at an alumni band concert, and those simple pleasures are what I like. What I hope they remember most about me is that I've had more than my share of failures. I've had a couple of successes, but I've tried real hard to be honest and fair.
You know, I think the greatest thing about hearing the words and thoughts of these special people is that they are so genuine and kind. And between their sincerity, values, and goals, they will help to change the world.
I know exactly what you're saying. They are ripple makers. They are creating ripples that will last into all of Boyertown's generations to come. We can already see them happening. Our special people also shared memories of moments in their lives when they were touched by ripple makers. Special people know special people, Jeff.
Dad he wasn't shy. He wasn't abrasive. He didn't offend people, but he knew how to take care of a situation, and he could speak up.
When I was a senior in high school, Dirk Grimm was then assistant superintendent, or assistant supervising principal, I guess was his title. He was willing to accept the student as he was, but at the same time, you didn't want to get in trouble with that man, because if you were in trouble, you could be in physical trouble as well as, and your parents would definitely know about it. There's no question.
In high school, one of the first jobs I had was to be in charge of the debating team. And I remember one of my first debating students was Kenny Nice. And I've always proud to have been Kenny Nice's teacher, because I thought he was one of the finest attorneys. And the people just when he passed away, that was a shock to the community, because everybody liked Kenny Nice. You know, he was a fine man. You never felt that you were down here and he was up here. You were on the same level. I was always so proud of him. Yeah, he was a fine man.
We help people, and it's a good feeling in your heart and soul that you're doing something good. And we had a canteen, was well equipped, and I don't want to forget my other volunteers that worked with me. They did the excellent job helping me. And most of the fires or any emergency we would attend. They'd call us and I would get the canteen ready and pick up the meat, the potato, the bread or whatever we needed, and went to the emergency.
My mother was a sister to Hefty Fryer, and I don't know if you folks remember Hefty at all, but he served 12 terms in our House of Representatives. And I can say that probably one of the proudest days of my life is I'm up in Harrisburg, and it was Inauguration Day. And Lester was already pretty well, he had high ranking. By the way, he was known as Frugal Fryer. Anyway, there was a speaker up on the podium, and he might as well have been talking to a wall. He goes, beep, 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 beep. The next speaker was my uncle, Lester K. Fryer. When that gavel was hit, there was absolutely total silence. You could hear a pin drop in that room. The reason being, he owed nobody anything. All of his campaigns were with his own money. He started poor, and he didn't make his money in politics. He started poor. That was a very poor family. When he spoke, you either liked him or you didn't like him. There wasn't too much gray in between because he spoke the truth. Sometimes you didn't want to hear it, but it was the truth. And I'm going to tell you, and he was a skinny little runt. I mean, if you looked at him and his name was Hefty, you'd say, wow. And he's from Boyertown, this little town of Boyertown. And it's about our youth, BBB, that the students have come forth to help. And I can't say enough about Zach Reinert. Zach Reinert was recommended for the state for an award for all his participation that he did with building a better Boyertown and his videoing of the makings and goings-on of town. That happened when he was a student at Boyertown High School. Now he's a student at Kutztown University. And now guess what? He has his own TV program on Comcast. I can't be prouder to see our youth taking steps forward in the right direction.
Daniel was a very successful businessman in Boyertown with the Boyer store. His son, James K. Boyer, is part of my direct line. That was my great-great-grandfather. He and Henry, his brother, J&H.K. Boyer, had the store, at which time it was called J&H.K. Boyer, also still involved in the bank. And their son, and this is the first one that I really remember, my grandfather, Daniel B. Boyer, was born in 1892. Subsequently, after a career in business and running the store, became president of the National Bank of Boyertown in 1950 and remained as president until 1970, when he turned the reins over to his son, James K. Boyer, my uncle, who ran the bank until about 1990. Especially when he became president of the bank, he realized he was a businessman, and he realized that communities were only going to be as strong as their businesses.
Well, she was, I guess you'd call her obnoxious or something. You couldn't suit her, and it wasn't just us. All the other stores complained about her, too. That was her way, and she was quite something. And I remember she used to buy, we had a rack with paper books on paper editions, and she bought quite a few of those. And one time she come in, and we had just gotten a whole new supply of them, and she saw them, and there were some that she wanted, but she didn't have enough money with her. She asked my husband, at that time I was married to Ted Smith, and she said, will you hold these books for me till I come back? And she said, I'd like to have them. Then he said, well, he says you can take them along and pay them when you come in again. And then she said, would you trust me like that? And he said, until you give me reason not to.
Well, there have been so many. One individual who I did not write about because I've just taken a break the last couple months from writing. But the first person who comes to my mind is Bill Hollenbach. Bill just passed away a few months ago, and just an outstanding individual. Gave so much back to the community. There have been so many people such as Paul Hafer, who owned Boyertown Body Works and created the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles and Duryea Day and so forth. The list really goes on and on. Educators, common folk, so-called common folk in the community, such as Elmira Malger. Many people will remember the name Elmira Malger. Fantastic, humble lady who every year at Memorial Day sold poppies for the Boyertown American Legion Auxiliary. Those are the kinds of people that stick out in your mind, and those are the kind of people that I like to write about over the years, and so many, really. My many years with the newspaper, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, I should have mentioned this earlier, my wonderful teacher and mentor, Mary Jane Schneider-Lentz, taught me the newspaper business when I came there right out of high school in 1973. Mary Jane's, MJ's contribution was that she was not afraid to work. She was able to accomplish, my observation was she was able to accomplish 10 hours of work in 4 hours. She was such a hard worker, and she cared in a very quiet way. She cared so much about the community. She was one of the people almost single-handedly who was responsible for seeing Boyertown multi-service get started. And she had passions, including United Way, multi-service, spiritual and faith events at her church and elsewhere. And she believed in community newspapering. And she taught me the basics and the tenets of that.
My leadership really began with Don Webb's leadership. If he hadn't trusted me to be editor of the paper, I wouldn't have had that long career. But he came to me and asked me if I wanted the job, and I said yes. And it ended as a very long career. But it really started with Don and his belief in me. We were down on South Reading Avenue where the Boyertown Publishing Company is now, and two of the former editors were in the same building. Don and Bob Lobaugh were both in the building as part of the publishing company officers, and neither of them came in and looked over my shoulder as I started. They let me do my own thing. At one point, we had all down style. I had gotten this idea at some press conference, and we didn't have a capital letter in any headline. They never said a word to me. They let me go ahead and just do what I wanted to. Finally, I decided it looked pretty silly, and I went back to a more conventional style of headline. So that I think my leadership really began because they had all that confidence in me to let me go ahead and learn to be an editor, because I had to learn it as I went along. One of the persons I remember so well is Elwood Shanley, who was a minister in an independent church. He would come in with his church news every Monday morning, and he always had a smile on his face, and he just made the whole office. Monday was a terrible day because so much happened on Monday and you just had to get back to work. But he just made the day by coming into the office. One of the things I regret is that he had a prison ministry at the Trenton State Prison. And he invited me several times to go with him to the prison. And I never did that. That's one interview that I really missed in my career. Another person I remember very well is Harry Bertoya, because I would take pictures of his recent works or his current works, and I had interviews with him at his farm and the Sounding Sculptures. I did a special whole page on him at the time. And he was just so pleased that I was interested in him, that the local paper was interested in what he was doing. So it was like a mutual admiration society almost, and I was really thrilled that he was so cooperative and did so much, because he was world famous almost, and yet he was such a humble person and such an open person. When I was working with United Way, I had a very important person helping me, and that was Bob Fleming. He was the chairman of the Industrial Committee, and of course had been, first of all, a teacher and then an executive at Boyertown Body Works, and such a genuine person. He was also president of the school board when I was reporting as a newspaper editor, reporting on the school board meetings. But Bob was just such a genuine person and such a lover of this community. He liked the baseball, he played golf. Well, he was a football coach, I believe, at one point. So that I just think of him as representing this community so well because of his interest, of his humor, of his just his all-around genuine personality.
Special people have a way of creating lasting ripples.
You bet, Jeff. And they don't end here. Let's see if our audience can catch a name or two where they've been part of the ripples in the next flow of special people.
Dave Stahl, who was my first trumpeter in the band. Dave was an outstanding trumpet player in high school and went on professionally and played with name bands. And I guess I look at Dave as probably the most outstanding instrumental student that I had here.
Well, a lot of people never remember Bill Hoffman. He was a good worker. I remember the canteen, and Bill was with Willard Daughter. They went up to Hill Church up in that area. Now, it was snowing and it was ugly. They get top of Hill Church, the sun was out, it was a beautiful day. And Bill says, I'll never forget that. I knew that Mr. Hollenbach, as the man of the year, another good man that did so much for the Boyertown area with his store, and he did an awful lot for the people in the Boyertown area. Captain Tom Rogers and his wife, they have 2 children. They came from New York. He's doing an excellent job, really good.
Well, I think when the people question, it goes back to what we did as children and growing up as youth. And as I mentioned, church was very important. Pastor David Longacre was a long-term minister at St. John's Lutheran Church, very influential in my life growing up. My Sunday school teachers, I can remember Linwood Renninger, who is still in town today. He was just a young man, and he's still a young man, as I am, I hope. But he was a Sunday school teacher of mine. And then you had your school teachers. Harry Gilbert was a teacher, a neighbor, a mentor, and a friend. Lawrence Grimm, George Swinehart. And just last week I was at a restaurant, and a lady introduced herself to me saying, "You're Charles Haddad, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am, but I don't recognize you." and said, well, I was your 8th grade teacher. And this goes back almost 56 years ago, where she would come up to me and say hello. And the school was very important to us, and church was very important. And besides that, it was the merchants in town, Luther Schmoyer from Schmoyer's Lumberyard, Dan Baus Sr. from Baus's drugstore, Mr. Grimm from the meat market. I don't know his first name. We called him Mr. Everybody was Mr. at that time, and Mrs.
I can name a host of teachers that people will recognize. Annabelle Fake, Herb Hartman. I had Dan Rohrbach, who later became county superintendent of schools, and then it was known as the intermediate unit director. Harry Gilbert was there. Turk Grimm was there, the notorious Turk Grimm at that time, whom everybody knew from the phys ed and the athletics. Although he was an administrator, he was high school principal when I started there, and then became assistant superintendent. Harry Gilbert, who was high school principal when I graduated, and then became assistant principal, our assistant superintendent and superintendent. For me, one of the most memorable people was Arlene Fryer, affectionately known by hundreds of students as Chickie Fryer, subject to a lot of taunting. She was a phenomenal teacher. She taught me to write. She was a lady in the best sense of the word, and she was inflappable. She would not back off from anything. And when she became an administrator, she was the high school principal for only 4 years, but they were 4 tumultuous years in the late 60s, and she handled things well. And I have the highest regard for her.
So I got to know Mr. Ralph D. Turk, and he got me working. Keep in mind, that was a time when everybody was looking to do something to earn money. So he got me started. If I wasn't shoveling snow or cleaning springs or mowing lawns, I was working somewhere. So Mr. D. Turk and a lot of other people from this community looked kindly upon the youth of the time and gave them opportunities to do things for them, to earn money.
Well, primarily my grandfather, who was H. Lee and Breidenbach. He raised me from the time I was, well, all my life really, but from the time I was 12 on up until I was 23, I lived under his roof, and he supported me, he schooled me, he clothed me, he fed me. My mother, who got me involved in politics in Boyertown, I joined the Optimist Club when I was 28 years old. Jim Petrowitz was one. He was a very active member. He didn't want limelight, but he was always there to help, and that's an important factor. Jerry Crow, who has since died, he died of a heart attack a number of years ago, rather young. But he found his home in the Optimist Club as well, and very dedicated, which, again, is something you need.
One person I really felt so close to was Harry Gilbert. When I became editor, Harry Gilbert just assumed the superintendency of the school district. And I saw how much he cared for this community, and of course what he did for the library, what he did for multi-service. He just poured himself into this community, and and he and I worked together, of course, with multi-service especially. And he was just an inspiration because he was such a hard worker. He just believed in all these good things happening in the community and put his heart and soul into them. Jim Boyer started us off by giving us $1,000, and that was our first seed money for multi-service. So we went to the community and got some money together. Went hat in hand to business people, to the service clubs, to the borough itself, and got together $13,000 for our first year budget and hired Joe Gershaly. We hired Jo. We had money to pay her for only 2 months. So we said, are we going to survive or not? And we did. And look what has happened. We must give credit to Jo Gershaly as our first director, and the director for 23 years. Her caring, her compassion with people, her willing to change, her willing to grow through the whole process. She started in one room with just doing Meals on Wheels and ended up having to do a yearly budget for the Area Agency on Aging. So she grew with the whole process, and the staff grew with her. And it was her spirit, really, that got us going and carried us through. Well, and of course I don't know her as well, but Dana Eichert. And going through the whole process, the building process, with just organizing it, getting the fundraiser, getting the committees together, and just seeing the vision of the building itself, I think was a huge task for anyone to undertake. And Dana certainly did a wonderful job in organizing all that. Very helpful to me was Bob Frame. He did a lot of the research on the fire victims, even went down to the courthouse, looked up records, looked up census records, so I would have as accurate biographical information as I could.
Our community had lots of very special people, and I really enjoy coming back here to visit with them.
Well, personally, I'm very proud of being from Boyertown, and I'm very proud of being one of the characters that makes Boyertown what it is.
Let's talk about the character of the town. I would describe it as charming and quaint.
I'd say growing and prospering, but what would Dan Bowes call it, or Dan Boyer?
In those days, in that time, the townsfolk really responded.
I'll bet.
And they helped restock that store down there.
Wonderful.
The local ministers took part in it. They rolled up their shirt sleeves and they carried things. All kinds of folks from every walk of life helped Dad get back in business.
Wonderful.
We're very fortunate. We have a very rich landscape to work in. This is not a depressed coal mining area. We have wonderful land. We have wonderful resources. This community, unfortunately, has not gotten, wiped out with major floods, with mudslides, with firestorms, things like that. So, fortunately, very, very fortunately, it's been able to harness its innate resources. When you go downtown and can park your car, and your car's going to be there when you come back, you can find a parking space. Now, maybe you won't find it right in front of the business that you want to go, but you only have to walk a half a block. My younger son was living in New York City and would come for the first 5 years after he graduated from college, would come home and tell me about how wonderful the run was that he had in Central Park. And I'd look around and I'd think, we have a Central Park everywhere.
The unique qualities that make this community special are the people that live in it. From my perspective, if I want to describe what makes Boyertown Boyertown, I have to talk in terms of Bear Stadium. Everyone's familiar with it. Everyone knows it truly was a field of dreams. It came up from a cornfield that I recommended every week as that was being built. There would be a regular job conference where everybody involved in the construction would be there, and a lot of people that weren't involved in the construction. And once a week, they would hold one of these to keep things on course. And I recall one week, there was a question about padlocks for the gates around the field and so forth. And had anybody taken care of this? And if somebody was going to, they damn well better be keyed all alike. So we only need one key. And, well, no one had taken care of them. And that was the end of the discussion about that for that day. Now, I have to explain that there were hundreds of people on that job site sometimes. Many of them doing what one character by the name of Nate, that's all I can remember, was there every day. And all he did was look. He'd stand there and watch, see what was going on. In fact, it became a joke sometimes that people would say, get Nate to hold down that pile of lumber. You know, he'd sit on it, keep him out of our way. Now, I don't know if anybody ever did, but that's how they'd talk about him. Well, the following week at the job conference, the question of padlocks came up again. And someone reported that we don't need padlocks, we have padlocks. And it seems Nate ordered and provided the padlocks. Nobody asked him to, he just did. They were all keyed alike. Everybody was happy. But this is how this town gets together and does things for itself. We had foreign language classes traveling to Europe long before other schools did. I know as an administrator, many times I approved kids from Ole, Schuylkill Valley, some other school, going along to Europe with our trips. You had the willingness to take kids just about anywhere. Witness an Arlen sailor coming to me, and I knew when he came he was going to say he wanted to go to Europe, but he had the audacity to want to go to Romania behind the Iron Curtain, and indeed he did. And if you don't have that kind of cooperation that you need from the students and the parents, teachers aren't willing to do that. Not only was I principal when we brought TV into the high school, we had the audacity to bring in color TV. And it was 2 or 3 years later that other schools started bringing in black and white. But we were already in color. The same thing was true with computers. I remember going to the board and asking for additional memory for the computer system we were putting in and not getting it. We didn't get it because it was an additional $75,000 for computer memory, which is less memory than I now have in my PC downstairs, for which I paid $600. You know. But the board was willing to take those steps because the community was willing to support its schools.
I think I'm proud of having had the business. I'm proud of my family, but of the friends that even today that I see sometimes that will mention something about the store and coming into the store.
You can walk through our town and you can just imagine how people lived in the early 1900s and late 1800s. Our architecture is just delightful to look at. But it's more than just the physical structure of a town. It's really the people that make it so special. And I think we are still a town that cares for one another. Our social structure of helping one another and our churches and our schools, we support that which is around us. We build things together, we do things together, and we share our happiness and our sorrows with one another and with our families. So that makes it a very special place for me and for many others in town. But it's very nice to have children, your own children and grandchildren, go to the same building that I went to. It's just a connection between us that we had because that occurred.
In a small community, everyone runs to help. And it's a totally different kind of value. You develop friendships. Now, you do also in a city, but it's so spread out that your friends aren't close by. You know, it's just a different kind of lifestyle. Oh, a couple of years ago, I went out just to see the parade for a while, and it really did your heart good to see this huge parade that we had started so many years ago. And it makes you feel good that the small town values are still here.
We did other work besides the canteen. Christmas time, we took care of over 100 cases, families. And the area business like Tallarica's worked with the Salvation Army, with the meats and the supplies. And Christmas time and Easter, we would have to get supplies for that too. And we received the canned food from the school, and they put on drives for Christmas. We would pick up boxes and boxes of canned food for the people of Boyertown. The people care. They take care of their lawns. They take care of their homes. There's a lot of respect. There's love, which is important. And they're all hard-working people. And they work together as a group. And that's why I'm so proud to be in Boyertown.
We're a Victorian town, and as long as we take the present policy of trying to restore that Victorian atmosphere, I think we'll be successful. I think the one thing that makes this really unique is our volunteerism. The majority of great things that happen in this town are done by individuals or groups, not by government. I still think Boyertown is a good place to live. We don't have, yes, we have crime, but we don't have major crime. I think people like each other. I think they help each other. And we are a giving community, and hopefully the people moving in pick up on that.
As in most people in their youth at that time, we didn't have a lot of money to expend. So we had to scrounge, and I used to go around to the radio and television dealers. And I'd say, you have any old radios, or you have anything? And there wasn't anyone in Boyertown who wouldn't accommodate me in somehow.
The term quality of life is, somewhat hackneyed, I guess, but it does exist in Boyertown. I mean, there are so many events. It's really a twofold. It's the folks, the people who are organizing these events, but also the people who come out and participate. And sort of almost like cornucopia. I mean, people just get so excited about these things, and it's fun to see the excitement. I think it's a strong spiritual community, lots of churches. I think over the years, the foundation or the underpinnings of the community have been very spiritual. There are many strengths, I think. Again, it's probably a cliche, but it's largely a hard-working community. It's a community that sticks together. When there's an event that calls for fundraising or for just banding together and uniting for one cause, that happens in Boyertown.
People constantly tell me about the architecture. They always say, what's this about the bears? And I'm always extremely pleased to tell that story and how it got started, about this wonderful teacher, Jane Stahl, and how I met Jane. And this is another thing about our community. The first time I met Jane Stahl was in the school, and I saw the interaction of Jane with these kids, and I saw the respect for Jane Stahl. That's beautiful. And how Jane took a handful of kids and taught them a bit of marketing, and how those kids went out and sold. But the whole point of this bear project, I'm told we were a little short on this, we should have taught them how to make money on it too. But cohesiveness within the community. Every bear involves a kid. Every bear involves a professional artist for that kid to learn from, and every bear involves the community. That's beautiful. It doesn't get any more beautiful than that. Just Boyertown itself, we have a wonderful automobile museum. Our historical society. Just walk down our street and see how people are taking care of their properties and enhancing their architecture. our churches. We have some of the oldest churches in the United States are right here in the Boyertown community. We have a wonderful park. We have activities that are going on throughout the summer. We have movies under the stars. There's no charge for this. We have pool dances for the kids. There's no charge. We had fun days. There was no charge. Sidewalk Expo. That was our 43rd annual Sidewalk Expo. There's lots to do here in Boyertown. I get a lot of recognition because I'm mayor, but there's an awful lot of people in this town, and because I'm mayor, I have met these people who just do. They just do, and they expect nothing in return. Boyertown is blessed with wonderful families, and we care about our kids, and I'm told of this comment over and over again, what great kids we have. And I say, I know that. This is what Boyertown is made of. It's made of good stuff. That's why we will be successful. Boyertown is special.
Marianne's conviction is so firm. Boyertown is special.
Well, not only is it special or charming and quaint, but Boyertown is growing in business. It's mostly because of our hard work ethic.
Dad said to me, have you come to any ideas about, or have you come to the conclusion what you'd like to do? And I said, well, I would think I'd like to pursue your business. And he said, okay. He said, if you pursue the brewing industry, you're not going to embarrass me. You will start as an apprentice. When I came in there, into the brewery, he got me aside and said, look, Bill, you know, the fellows in the plant know that what the relationship is between you and I, that I'm your nephew. Now, he said, I cannot show favoritism. And if there is a problem within 100 miles of this brewery, I'm coming down on you. And I looked back and I thought that was a little hard, but going through life, he was right. And I have to say this, I'm 82, and the longer I live, the smarter my parents become, you know.
You've taken a smaller community. If you need help, there's going to be help there. Sometimes it's from surprising people. No, you may not even know the people. But here again, it's a community value and the spirit that is within the family structure.
Lynette, these interviews have opened our eyes to a lot of the beauty of Boyertown. And I know you're a fan of the community, a lifetime member with deep roots.
My life has been blessed. I grew up in a wonderful family that provided me with many, many happy childhood memories. Through my family, I met all sorts of wonderful people who made this town what it is. I've been lucky all my life, and I'd like to pass along some of the wisdom that these people that we interviewed shared with us so that we can all help to build a better Boyertown.
Some words of wisdom for those of us who teach.
You've got, number one, to love to work with kids. And if you don't know what I'm saying, just ask a teacher what she teaches, and I'll tell you the difference. If I ask an elementary teacher what she teaches, she tells you, I teach kindergarten, or I teach 4th grade, or I teach 6th. If you ask a junior high school teacher what they teach, they will tell you I teach 8th grade English, or I teach 9th grade social studies. If you ask a senior high school teacher what they teach English, or they teach math, or they teach science. Somewhere along the process there, it flips from teaching students to teaching subjects. We know the subject. Teach the kid. You've got to, even as a high school teacher, you've got to teach the student. I have told faculty time and time again, not only do we need a program for the kid who's going to MIT to become the rocket scientist, we need a program for the kid who's not going on to college, but if your house is burning, that sucker has gone through all sorts of training to become the assistant fire chief who's putting his life on the line to save your house. Or the woman who's married to him raising the funds through the ladies' auxiliary to get that fire truck that's going to save your house. We need to train them just as well. We need to treat every kid with respect and dignity.
I always felt that the value, part of the value in participation in a unit such as our band and marching unit was concerned, the value of that was in being able to perform at different places, and I felt that we had something here in America that they didn't have in Europe, and that was the American marching band, the type of situation that we had here. And I wanted the kids to get the experience of travel and being able to perform American music, American style shows to people that would appreciate what we did and hadn't had a chance to see these kind of things very much before.
You got to have them accept you as a person that they respect.
Well, you're trying to... The beauty of the Boyertown books that are being published, and this has to do a lot with the photographs. When our children and grandchildren see these photographs, they're going to throw them away because that doesn't exist anymore. But these books on Boyertown preserve that. Well, get involved with any project for the community. And you have to learn. And you don't even realize you're learning it. But as you work with other people, they have ideas, and you incorporate these ideas, and each person actually inspires the other person. Well, it's a small town values. You take Bear Stadium as just one small example. What the community can accomplish if they want to.
Working together.
I think Oldie, I think, has a baseball stadium, and you just go up to any of the smaller communities. They're all people with the same values in these communities, and they're the ones not only inspire their co-workers, but that goes on from generation to generation.
Business owners and community leaders can take some lessons too.
It is fine to use the facilities and take out of the community, but you have to also be willing to put back into it. I am fond of saying that good things don't happen by themselves. You have to make them happen. And we have a lot of good people in Boyertown making good things happen, but we need more of those good people. The vision of an impossible dream, it's really what I spoke of before, is to make Boyertown the community that it was when I was growing up here in town. A community where we took care of each other, a community where our children could relate to a smaller area, a community where we all know one another, and where we want to see not the good old times, but I may say the good old times. The good old times continue to be our current new times. And I think that is possible if we all do a little bit to improve the appearance of our town, to shop in our town, to make it viable. It can be that friendly, caring place it was when I grew up here 55 years ago. Working hard, there's no substitute for that. It won't come to you by yourself. You've got to make it happen. And I think I grew up in an area where I was given an opportunity to make it happen. I was given that chance. And yes, I did take advantage of it, and I made it happen. But it was the people of Boyertown, this community, that gave me that chance and opportunity. I would say that the final advice would be that to stay the course, It may be that we are not getting things done as promptly as possible and as fast as we'd like to see it happen, but it is happening. It is happening incrementally. And one of the problems we have is we're there every day, every minute, making it happen, and it's those gradual changes which we don't see, but somebody coming into town and those not participating see that big quantum leap. So it is happening, we're making it happen, and because of you people, it is happening.
First of all, you have to have the customers, which makes it successful, and trying to always do things that are right, and treat the customers right, try and be friendly. And I think that's a big thing.
I think it's going to take a concerted effort from a lot of folks, bring in some unique types of businesses. Some are coming in, whether those are coffee houses or crafty type shops, a new restaurant or two. I think that's what it's going to take. I mean, Boyertown, I think downtown Boyertown still has the advantage of being at the crossroads. So even though there are bypasses and major highways, still a lot of folks do travel through the center of town. So I think that's a possibility. I think, you know, you need to create a few more festivals and special events, arts events and so forth that are going to draw folks into town, and I think that's the key to keep bringing people in. A lot of luck, a lot of prayer, and I guess the rest is history.
I had some excellent teachers who interested me in government, and if we are to sustain our society, we need good government.
Take the time occasionally to go to a council meeting and sit through it. Not to complain, just to sit through it.
Some of our interviews ended up with talking about some pretty deep stuff. Their philosophical advice was inspiring.
And you'll know why we love this town and these people.
Stay the course. Be confident in who you are, and things will turn out okay.
Being close to God.
What are you most proud of?
Proud of? Well, the leaders of the Salvation Army and the people in Boyertown teaching us to do the right. Try to get bigger industry in Boyertown so our people can have more jobs right here in the area.
I think the biggest thing that I'm very impressed with is the groundswell of interest in building a better Boyertown to preserve the best of what we have had historically. Doesn't mean that we've got to, build a moat to, to keep the rest of the world out. But I think that what I see in building a better Boyertown and a real grassroots effort is to let's accentuate the best that we have and preserve the best that we have and keep those traditions alive and build upon them in light of the fact that we're all interconnected.
One evening I had 9 of the 10 rooms rented. In that morning, sitting at that breakfast table was Korea, China, Japan, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Germany, England, France, and New Jersey. That's what comes to Boyertown. We had the Axis powers of the world were sitting at that table. And you know what? They were doing business. I would have loved to have taken that table and sent that down to Washington, D.C. and say, now, folks, this is how you start. You sit down at a table together, you have a little orange juice and coffee, and you start talking. Because if you want to make a deal, you can make it happen. It's give and take.
Well, I've always been raised to make a conscious decision to make a difference every day for the better. It's also important that we tell future generations and people that are here now to don't be afraid, give back to your community, and help us make Boyertown a very special place in the future.
I'd suggest that you take advantage of every opportunity that you're offered and get involved. You can make a difference.
And my last words would be, it's been said that every life is a biography. Everyone's had wonderful experiences in their life. They all tell stories, and I came from a family of inveterate storytellers, and I'd hear Mom and Dad tell a story, and I'd say, yeah, I remember hearing that, but I forgot it. So I started writing everything down, and I guess that's called oral history, and that's what I'm very interested in. And so my advice would be to write down everyone's stories, because they will vanish with time. So preserve those people and those memories for years to come.
And if my young wisdom isn't too bold to share, my advice would be to live free and take up every opportunity that you can, but always remember where you're from and always come back to your roots in the end.
But some of the words that very special people of Boyertown would have you remember are the ones we'd like to leave you with today.
We need it throughout the world, more love and and less hatred. I mean, the dollar isn't that important. Your life is more important.
Don't take life so seriously. Enjoy yourself. Life's short. Way too short.
It's been wonderful. We'll get there. We are going to get there. We will. We will succeed.
That's a collection of, that's probably something unusual.
This doesn't have a soda fountain anymore. Dan Bouse and I have fond memories of the good old days in Boyertown.
Business is so...
Oh, sorry, I was down.
Okay. Thanks, because I wasn't ready.
Hey! And yet, we can see through their memories that things have changed throughout the years.
They certainly have, Jess. Sorry.
Nope, no one named Jess here.
It's the guy on the motorcycle.
All right, go ahead.
Ready? How do we coordinate looking at each other?
We'll go back.
I'll just watch for you.
You'll watch?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
I'll
look at you.
Why would you want to grow up anywhere else? Boyertown is the place to be. I love Boyertown.
Oh, that is too funny. Thank you, kids.
Hey, I didn't hear my name anywhere in there.
Oh, well, I'm